At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law stood up, looked me straight in the eyes and screamed, "You call this trash food? Even my dog wouldn't eat it." I didn't argue that I didn't cry, I simply smiled. What happened after that smile changed my family forever. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my story has reached. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite day of the year. For over 40 years I had been the one who brought our family together. Every turkey I roasted, every pie I baked, every handwritten recipe card tucked inside my old wooden box carried memories of birthdays, laughter, and people I loved. This year I woke up before 5 in the morning. Outside my kitchen window, the November air painted the trees in shades of amber and gold. Inside, the smell of fresh sage, butter, cinnamon, and roasted vegetables slowly filled the house. I basted the turkey every 30 minutes. Just like my late husband, Harold, always liked it. I made homemade stuffing from the recipe my grandmother taught me when I was 16. The mashed potatoes were whipped until they were as smooth as silk. The pumpkin pie cooled on the windowsill while I polished my mother's old china plates one by one. She's 70 years old. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but every dish was prepared with love. Not because anyone expected perfection, because this family was worth every minute. Or at least, that's what I still believed. Around 4 o'clock, my son Michael arrived with his wife, Lauren, and my 2 grandchildren. The children ran inside laughing. Michael gave me a quick hug before checking messages on his phone. Lauren barely looked at me. Her eyes slowly traveled across the dining room, stopping on every decoration as if she were inspecting a hotel she planned to criticize online. Something about the way she smiled made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was imagining it, that I wanted this Thanksgiving to be peaceful. I had no idea that before dessert was served, one sentence would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. I carried the turkey to the center of the table with both hands, just as I had done every Thanksgiving for decades. The golden skin glistened beneath the dining room lights, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe everything would be all right. The grandchildren clapped. "Wow, Grandma! It smells amazing," little Ethan said with a grin. His words warmed my heart more than he could ever know. I carved the first slices carefully and served everyone before filling my own plate. That was always my way. Mothers ate last. For several minutes, all I could hear was the soft clinking of silverware against china. Then Lauren took one bite. She slowly put down her fork. She looked around the table, making sure every eye was on her before turning toward me. "Seriously?" she said with a laugh. I blinked. "I'm sorry." She pushed her plate away. "You've been cooking Thanksgiving dinner for 40 years, and this is the best you can do." The room instantly fell silent. Michael kept staring at his plate. He didn't say a single word. Lauren folded her arms. Then, loud enough for the entire room to hear, she shouted, "You call this trash food? Even my dog eats better than this." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked at my son. I waited for him to defend me. He never did. I simply smiled. Not because her words didn't hurt, but because at that exact moment, I noticed something on the dining room table that Lauren desperately hoped I would never see. My smile seemed to confuse Lauren for a second. She looked almost disappointed. I think she had expected tears. Or an argument, maybe even for me to leave the table in humiliation instead. I calmly picked up my napkin and folded it across my lap. "If the dinner isn't to your taste," I said softly, "you're welcome to eat something else later." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't play the saint now." A few nervous chuckles escaped from the far end of the table. No one laughed louder than Lauren. I wasn't looking at her anymore. My eyes had settled on a cream-colored envelope resting beside her designer handbag. It hadn't been there when everyone first arrived. Across the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Confidential property transfer documents." Lauren noticed where I was looking. Almost instinctively, she slid the envelope under her purse. Too late. I'd already seen enough. Michael finally looked up. "Mom, let's just enjoy dinner," he muttered. Enjoy dinner? After everything that had just happened, I studied my son's face. The little boy who once cried because someone teased me at the grocery store had disappeared. In his place sat a man too afraid to challenge his own wife. A strange calm settled over me. Not anger, not heartbreak, clarity. Whatever was inside that envelope had nothing to do with Thanksgiving, and everything to do with me. For the first time that evening, I realized Lauren hadn't come for family. She had come for something far more valuable. I barely tasted the rest of my dinner. The laughter around the table faded into distant noise as old memories quietly returned. There was a time when Lauren used to call me every Sunday. She would ask for my pie recipes, she'd hug me goodbye and tell everyone how lucky she was to have a mother-in-law who treated her like a daughter. I believed every word. When Michael lost his job 8 years ago, I refinanced my house so they wouldn't lose theirs. I never told anyone. Not even my closest friends. When Lauren wanted to open her little bakery, I emptied most of my savings without asking for a single dollar in return. It isn't a loan, I told her. It's family. She cried that day. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "I'll never forget your kindness." I smiled because I believed her. But now, looking across the Thanksgiving table, I wondered if those tears had ever been real. Or if they had simply been another performance. My late husband Harold used to warn me. "Margaret," he would say, "a generous heart is a blessing. But never let anyone mistake it for weakness." At the time I laughed. Harold always worried too much. Or so I thought. As my eyes drifted back toward the envelope beneath Lauren's purse, his words echoed louder than ever. Maybe he had seen something years before I ever did. And maybe that envelope was finally about to prove he had been right all along. Dinner continued, but no one seemed interested in the food anymore. The turkey I had spent hours preparing sat untouched in the middle of the table. Conversations became forced. Every smile looked rehearsed. Lauren, however, suddenly became unusually cheerful. She poured herself another glass of wine and leaned toward Michael with a satisfied smile. "We should probably talk to your mom tonight," she whispered. She thought I couldn't hear her. She was wrong. Michael hesitated. "Maybe this isn't the right time." Lauren's smile disappeared. "If not tonight, then when? The attorney already has everything ready." Attorney. The word hit me harder than her insult ever could. My fingers tightened around my water glass. I kept my face perfectly calm. A few minutes later, Lauren excused herself from the table. "I'll be right back." She grabbed her purse, but in her hurry, she left the cream-colored envelope behind. No one else noticed. I quietly stood to refill the gravy boat. As I walked past her chair, my eyes fell on the top page sticking slightly out of the envelope. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to point. One line was clearly visible: property transfer authorization, and beneath it, my home address. The house Harold and I had built together 43 years ago. A cold chill ran down my spine. This was never about my cooking. It was never about Thanksgiving. They hadn't come to celebrate, they had come with a plan. And somehow, my home was at the center of it. I slowly returned to my seat as if nothing had happened, and no one noticed the change in my expression. I picked up my fork, cut another piece of turkey, chewed, swallowed. Every movement was calm. Inside, however, my mind was racing. Property transfer authorization. There was only one property that mattered. My home. The place where Harold and I had raised Michael. The front porch where we watched summer sunsets. The oak tree we planted the week Michael was born. Every wall carried a memory. And now, someone wanted to take it away. Lauren returned a minute later. The first thing she looked for wasn't me. It was the envelope. The moment she saw it still lying on the chair, her shoulders relaxed. She had no idea I had already read enough. Dinner ended soon after. As everyone stood to leave the table, Lauren smiled sweetly and said, "Margaret, could we talk privately for a few minutes?" Her voice was warm, almost affectionate. Anyone listening would have believed she cared about me. I smiled back. "Of course." She led me toward the living room while Michael quietly followed behind us. Then Lauren reached into her purse, removed the cream-colored envelope, and gently placed it on my coffee table. "There are just a few papers we'd like you to sign," she said. "It's only to make things easier for everyone." I looked at the envelope, then at my son. He couldn't meet my eyes. That moment, I realized this conversation hadn't been planned today. It had been planned for a very long time. Lauren gently pushed the envelope toward me. "There's really nothing complicated," she said with a reassuring smile. "These papers simply make it easier to handle the house someday. If anything ever happens to you, Michael won't have to deal with probate." She spoke as though she were doing me a favor. I didn't reach for the documents. Instead, I looked at my son. "Did you read these?" Michael hesitated. Then he nodded once. Lauren explained everything. Explained everything. Those two words hurt more than I expected, because Michael used to ask me before making the smallest decision. Now he trusted someone else's explanation more than his own mother's questions. Lauren uncapped a silver pen and placed it beside the envelope. "If you sign tonight," she said softly, "we can stop worrying about all this legal paperwork." I smiled politely. "I've learned something over 70 years. She tilted her head. "What's that?" "Never sign anything after a holiday dinner." For the first time that evening, Lauren's smile disappeared. "It only takes a minute," she insisted. "I'm sure it does," I replied. "But my attorney taught me something even more important. Every document deserves daylight." The room became so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Lauren glanced nervously at Michael. He still said nothing. That's when I realized neither of them had expected me to refuse, and suddenly, the plan they had rehearsed so carefully was beginning to fall apart. Lauren slowly pulled the pen back toward herself, but the pleasant smile never quite returned to her face. "I understand," she said. "There's no rush." Her voice remained calm, yet I noticed the tension in her fingers as she slipped the documents back into the envelope. Michael finally spoke. "Lauren's only trying to help." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know you believe that." He lowered his eyes again. For years, I had watched my son become quieter whenever Lauren entered the room. At first, I thought it was simply the rhythm of marriage, learning to compromise, choosing peace over arguments. Now I wasn't so sure. Lauren stood and gathered everyone's coats. "Well," she said brightly, "thank you for dinner." Dinner. The same meal she had called trash, less than an hour earlier. I walked them to the front door anyway. My parents had taught me that dignity wasn't something another person could take away. It was something you chose to keep. Outside, the cold November wind swept across the porch. The grandchildren hugged me tightly. "Love you, Grandma," Ethan whispered. "I love you too," I replied, holding him a little longer than usual as Michael walked toward the car. He turned back as though he wanted to say something, but Lauren called his name without another word. He got into the passenger seat. I stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared into the darkness. Only then did I lock the front door. I wasn't locking danger out. I realized it had already been invited in. The house felt strangely quiet after everyone left. I gathered the empty plates one by one, rinsing them beneath warm water while the last of the Thanksgiving candles flickered on the table. For years, cleaning up after family dinners had always filled me with contentment. This time, it felt different. Harold's framed photograph sat on the kitchen counter, exactly where it had been since the day he passed away. I stopped in front of it. "You tried to warn me," I whispered. "I just didn't want to believe it." His gentle smile in the photograph never changed, but I could almost hear his steady voice reminding me to think before trusting anyone with what we had built together. I dried my hands and walked into the study. Inside the bottom drawer of Harold's old desk was a leather folder I hadn't opened in years. Every important document was still neatly organized in his careful handwriting. At the very top rested the business card of our family attorney, Daniel Brooks. Harold had once told me, "If anything ever feels wrong, call Daniel before you sign a single piece of paper." I picked up the phone. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Too late to call, but not too late to leave a message. "Daniel," I said after the tone, "this is Margaret. I think it's finally time we talked." As I ended the call, I looked around the quiet room. For the first time that evening, I no longer felt frightened. I felt prepared. Tomorrow would not begin with another family dinner. It would begin with the truth. The next morning, I arrived at Daniel Brooks' office carrying Harold's old leather folder. Daniel greeted me with a warm smile that quickly faded when he saw the concern on my face. "I take it this isn't just a social visit," he said. I quietly told him everything. The Thanksgiving dinner. Lauren's insults, the envelope, the paper she wanted me to sign. When I finished, Daniel sat silently for a moment before opening the folder Harold had prepared years earlier. "There are a few things," he said, adjusting his glasses, "that I don't think your family knows." He slid several documents across the desk. Harold had created a trust long before his death. The house could not be transferred without my informed, voluntary consent, witnessed by independent legal counsel. No private family dinner. No pressured. No surprise signatures. Daniel looked at me. "Margaret, you are fully protected." I felt the weight on my shoulders begin to lift. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't reacting to someone else's plan. I had the truth. And now I knew exactly how to move forward. 3 days later, Michael called. His voice sounded uncertain. "Lauren wants to know if you've had time to look over the papers." I stood by the living room window, watching the autumn leaves drift across the yard Harold had loved. I have, I answered calmly. And my attorney has reviewed them as well. Silence, long enough for Michael to understand that I knew far more than they had expected. I won't be signing anything, I continued. If either of you wants to discuss my future, you'll do it with my attorney present. He let out a slow breath. I understand. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious, I simply felt at peace. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't protecting my house, I was protecting the life Harold and I had built together. Several weeks passed before I heard from Michael again this time. He came alone, no envelope, no documents, no rehearsed explanations. He stood quietly on my front porch, looking older than I remembered. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have spoken up that night. I looked at him for a long moment before opening the door. Come inside. We talked for hours, not about the house, not about lawyers, but about family, and the silence that can hurt more than cruel words. Some wounds don't disappear overnight. Trust isn't rebuilt with a single apology. It grows back one honest choice at a time. As for Lauren, she never mentioned those papers again. Perhaps she finally understood that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Every Thanksgiving since then has been smaller, quieter, but strangely warmer. I've learned that a full table doesn't always mean a full heart. The people who truly love you will never measure your worth by what you own, they'll measure it by the love you've shared. And if there's one lesson my story has taught me, it's this: protect your kindness, protect your dignity. But above all, never be afraid to protect yourself. Thank you for listening to my story.